This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to day one of mobile device hacking and security. I'm OTW, and for the next 3 days, we're going to focus on mobile hacking. As you can imagine, this is a very large subject, okay, and a very important subject. Um, Mobile hacking, a 3 day course on mobile hacking can just begin to scratch the surface of what is possible in the mobile device industry. This is a huge industry, and in many ways, it has more potential vulnerabilities than computer hacking does. All right, but imagine, if we were trying to do one course on computer hacking, it would be very difficult to do because there's so many different vectors to attempt to hack a computer. So mobile devices are similar. As a matter of fact, they probably have more vectors. They are connected not only to the cellular network, but also to the IP network as well, and a number of other services and protocols that you don't see on computer systems. So this is a very large subject. Before we get going here, a couple things I want to take care of. One, a little housekeeping. All right. So most of you have been to class before. I think Storm, you're the only one who hasn't been to class before. Um, the way we work things is that we start at 3 p.m. UTC. We're going to run for 3 days. Um, we may not always run the entire time. We run probably to This is your second class? Oh, I'm sorry, Storm. All right, so you know the how things work here, and we're going to we'll run somewhere to about 10 or 11 UTC, depending upon where we are in the class. Oh yeah, you did the snort class, yeah. Vadim says I get paid for learning. What's not to love? That's really good. I like that. Okay, you should get paid for learning, right? Especially if you're already in the cybersecurity IT industry. You should get paid to learn. Um, should be part. If you're in the IT industry and you're not learning, then you're falling behind, right? Because our industry changes so rapidly. If you go, say, if you were to leave our industry for 2 or 3 years, maybe 5 years, you'd find yourself really understanding very little. Things change that rapidly. So one has to constantly be learning to keep up. You got to keep on running just to keep up. Many years ago, I mentioned to a CEO of a company I was working with. I said, one of the things I love about IT is that there's always something new and it's always changing. And he said to me, "That's what I hate about our industry." He said, "I can never, I've always got to be learning, and I'm tired of that." So he probably wasn't in the right industry. I don't know what happened to him. It was actually a computer animation company out of Chicago. In any case, it was quite a few years ago, so I have no idea what happened to him. So, anyways, the way we're going to run this class is that we'll run for about an hour, hour and 15 minutes. We'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and run for an hour, hour and a half, and take a 1 hour meal break in the middle, so you can go stretch your legs, go get yourself a meal. For some of you, most of you, it'll be lunch, but I think Mark, it'll probably be dinner. Mark, are you still in Rwanda? Is that right? Mark's in Rwanda for a while. How long are you going to be there? By the way, that's a good question. That's one of those places I want. Couple years, okay. It's one of those places I want to go visit. Would you recommend it outside of the poor internet access? Would you recommend it as a place to visit? Yeah, Mark has had problems with his internet access in class before. Yeah, you would. Okay, good. I'm really intrigued with Rwanda. and it's a gorgeous country. Good. All right. Have you seen the gorillas yet? No. Are you going to do that? It's too expensive. Yeah, a friend of mine went there a few years ago. Yeah, $1,500 an hour. That's what it is. Yeah. And a friend of mine went there a few years ago, and it was only $500. And and now it's up to $1,500 an hour. So it's a pricey trip. But in any case, Uganda is cheaper. So you go up to Uganda and go see the gorillas there. Is Uganda safe? It's $400 in Uganda. Well, that's much more reasonable. Yeah. In any case, so we're going to run this class. We'll take that. Yeah, safe as well. All right. So, do you feel safe in Rwanda, by the way? Do you feel safe there? Yeah, totally. Good. Um, so we'll take that meal break in Kigali at least. Okay. And then we'll come back in the afternoon session and we'll run an hour and 15 minutes, take a break, and then run another hour and a half. Okay. So that's kind of the plan. I would prefer that you respond, chat with me via the chat, okay? If there's something that we can't accomplish over chat, like a very complex question, feel free then to turn on your mic and we can chat about it. It works much better if you have a headset. Obviously, I'm using a headset. Your mic that's built into your laptop generally is pretty low quality and it picks up a lot of ambient noise in the room, makes it hard to hear. But if that's the only option we have, we'll run with that. All right. The plan for the next 3 days is that today is going to be kind of an overview, okay, of the technologies in the mobile device market. All right, so we'll be looking at things like the cellular networks, iOS, Android. We'll look at, as soon as we do an overview, we're going to look at one brand new, it just came up in the last week or so, hack of mobile devices called the SIM Jacker. We don't have much information on it yet, okay? But it basically allows the taking over of anybody's phone anywhere, okay? That's pretty powerful hack. All right, so it got revealed maybe a week or so ago, and we're still getting details about it right now. Maybe you've heard of it, but it's a big deal, I think. It's a big deal because it also shows you that the more you understand about the technology, the better you're going to be at hacking. And that's probably true of just about anything, right? So to just launch into hacking without talking about the technology would be fruitless, I think. All right, see, I got a question here. This is from Storm. He says, I've heard of SIM swapping being used to get access to people's Bitcoin accounts. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of getting hold of people's Bitcoin accounts. But here, it's remotely done, okay? SIM swapping has to be physically done, right? This will be remotely done, where somebody remotely can go ahead and take over. And it's basically, it's using commands that the device manufacturers have for being able to do like updates to your system. And it works on most SIMs, not all SIMs, but most SIMs. And it looks like it's a nation state who's using it. It's been developed by probably an outside contractor. You probably know that nation states contract out a lot of their hacking. Whether you're talking about the NSA in the US or the Russian GRU, China doesn't contract out. They mostly use the Red Army for that. But other nation states do. They use contractors. The US has many, many, many contractors. And probably more work is done by the contractors than is actually done by, say, the CIA or the NSA, right? So and oftentimes these contractors are former NSA, CIA people. So they leave the government, and they form a new company, or they go to work for a company who has a contract with the government. They can make a lot more money that way. So they'll do their 20 years working for the government, and then they'll go out and join a contractor. The other thing is that you can get a lot more innovative, maybe, work done that way. So for instance, it's hard to develop a 0 day, right? It's hard to develop a 0 day, but there are companies who are working on this night and day, coming up with 0 days, and then they go ahead and sell them. Okay, and so there are probably a half a dozen or more companies in the world who sell to nation states hacks that they can use to spy on each other or their own citizens, what have you. So, for instance, we know a couple of years ago, Eternal Blue was used by the NSA. It got released. We all know about that. It's that hack. I spent a lot of time on it in my new book coming out, Getting Started Becoming a Master Hacker. We really delve deep into what's going on there and how that works, mostly as a case study to understand how these types of hacks work. It was developed by a contractor. The NSA purchased it from somebody else. So Simjacker appears to be along that line, where some contractor developed Simjacker and either has sold it to a nation state or is using it themselves for a nation state. My guess is that it's probably the US or Russia, one of the two, but we'll see. China has some really good hackers too, but China is, when they hack, they're generally looking for intellectual property. Okay, and the Simjacker has all the fingerprints of either Russia or the US, who are just looking to gather information on people, all right, and listen to conversations. And Simjacker basically allows them to be able to listen in on and read all the emails and text messages from just about any phone, okay? So let's get rolling then. Let's start off by talking about the mobile device risk ecosystem. All right. Mobile device hacking risk ecosystem. All right. There's about 5.13 billion mobile devices. So, that means that there's 7.3 billion people on the planet. So, and some people have more than one. So you're talking about half the people on the planet have a mobile device. Now, this is much deeper penetration than, say, a PC or a computer, right? Because mobile devices are able to penetrate much of the lesser developed world, because you can get a cell phone for, heck, in the United States, you can buy a smartphone for $30, $40, right? Or less in some cases. Buy used ones for even less than that. But brand new ones, you can pick them up for $30, $40. And in lesser developed nations, you probably can pick them up for $10 or $20. Compare that to a full-blown computer. It's hard to get a full-blown computer for what? $1,000, $500, much more. So the penetration is much deeper in the world than, say, we have in computers. It means that we have, it's a much bigger market to be able to hack and secure. All right. So about half the world. Must have made a typo there. It's about this. This data actually came from this month. Okay, September 2019. I don't know what the 90 is there. It must be a fat finger mistake. There's about 2 million apps on Google Play, about 1.83 million apps on Apple Store. There are 6 billion SMS texts every day in the US and 23 billion worldwide. All right. So if you are spying on this stuff, you've got a lot. you have a lot to gather, okay, and you also have a lot of potential vectors, okay. So each one of these apps is a potential vector, okay, and then trying to gather information or communication between these devices means you're going to have an awful lot of data. So if you can think of what we're going to get to right after this is a SIM jacker. If you go ahead and embed a malware into, a few billion people's phones, the amount of data that you have to sift through is incredible. The NSA a few years ago built a facility in the middle of nowhere in Utah, United States, which is in the Rocky Mountain region of the US, if you're not familiar. Big desert area, and they built this huge facility that is the largest electricity consumer in the state of Utah. And all that facility does is store all the data that NSA collects. Okay, so most of the hacking and other work takes place at Fort Meade, which is just outside of Baltimore, just a few miles from Baltimore. You have to, I think I've mentioned this before, but when you go into, Cudley, you're in the Washington, D.C. area, you know that when you go past the NSA there, you go past, you have to drive past Snowden Parkway, right, to get to NSA over at near Baltimore, which I just crack up every time I go there, since Snowden is not well liked over at NSA. But his grandfather was a very famous admiral. And so the road you have to drive across to get to Fort Meade is Snowden Parkway. In any case, I wonder how many people get irritated every morning going to NSA to see that. So they've got a huge amount of data they have to collect. They have this huge facility. It's just many, many, many machines storing all the communications that they are spying on. Perceived insecurity in this market. Mobile devices are one of the most important developments in the history, another fat finger, history of the internet. After assurances that mobile devices were safe and not a risk factor, I actually remember, maybe some of you have been around long enough, that I can remember when smartphones first came out, okay? What, 2007, 2008, right? And the vendors were saying, well, there's no need for antivirus because these phones are all safe. There are no risks, right? And that initially, none of the antivirus developers had products for Android or for iOS, right? They said there was no market for it, right? It took a few years before they began to see that, yes, there really was. I can remember being offered assurances that the Android, for instance, was, because everything was run in a sandbox environment. Okay, we have the Dalvik virtual machines we'll see with the structure of Android, that there was no risk. There was no way that malware could get onto a phone, right? So after assurances that mobile devices were safe and not a risk vector, today mobile devices are under attack continuously and likely a major security threat to your organization, okay, or to your own privacy. Andrew says, I remember that too about Android having no risk. Yeah. I was trying to convince people, going, what do you mean there's no risk? I can't understand what you're saying. There's no risk. How can you believe that? Okay. And it took a few years. This is like, 2010, somewhere around there. 2010, when they was still saying that, oh, there was no risk. There's no risk. And the antivirus folks just hadn't developed anything yet. Vadim says, yes, Mac told you that it can't get hacks, or Apple. Yeah. Yeah, Apple's been saying that for a long time. The truth of the matter is that there's fewer malware that are developed for the Mac, as you know, because it takes just as much work to develop a 0-day for Mac as it does for, say, a PC or a Microsoft system. But if you develop it for a PC, you've got like 95% of the global machines are running Microsoft. So if you have to spend the same amount of time developing a 0-day for a Mac as you do for on Apple, you have a much larger market to hit. The other thing I'd say about that is that when was the last time you saw a corporate email server, file server, web server running Apple's operating system, right? Yes, there's a lot of Macs out there, whatever it is, 3 or 4% of the market, right? But how many of those machines are running corporations, right? If I'm a hacker attacker, that's what I'm looking for. I don't want, I might be able to attack your system and get your credit card numbers, your PII, or maybe your Bitcoin. But really what I want is to get that corporate server. And those corporate servers are running either Microsoft Server, okay, or they're running Linux generally. And there are some Unix systems out there as well, and there are some other operating systems as well. But primarily, if you look at corporate servers, they're all running Microsoft Server or Linux. So why would I waste my time developing malware for the iOS so I could get your credit card number that might be worth $50 to me, and it's going to cost me, tens of thousands of dollars to develop or more. I mean, some 0 days go for millions of dollars, right? That's what they cost. So I'm not going to spend millions of dollars to get one credit card number or one PII, okay? So that's why you see that distinction. But the other thing that I want to say about that is that there are people who are running Macs who don't have any perimeter protection or AV because they think that they are not at risk. In many ways, that makes the job of the hacker much easier. So this is a much bigger threat, okay? And because there are so many of these systems and there's so many vectors to get in, right? If we're talking about a PC, right, we have the operating system, which are getting more and more secure, but everybody's running, there's lots of software out there, right? But basically everybody's running Microsoft Office and maybe some Adobe products or what have you, right? So it's all going to be very similar, unlike in the mobile market where there's so much fragmentation. There's so many apps. Okay, we saw there's like 2 million apps on the Android and 2 million apps on the Apple system, iOS system. Plus you have more services running on that phone or mobile device. And there's fragmentation within the Android market because everybody offers basically a slightly different operating system. If you're running Android, the Android that you're running is going to be dependent upon the manufacturer of the device, right? So there are going to be slight differences. This makes for a lot of opportunity for the hacker. Although the devices differ from our typical IT security risk, essentially we can view mobile devices security similarly to what is familiar to us. All right. So we have our mobile browser and our native code and our virtual machine and our operating system assets. They're going to interact with 802.11, our Wi-Fi, mobile network operator, the carrier network, and our home and private network as well. And then going out through the cloud to a server. So in some ways, it's similar. Man-in-the-middle threats, most threats, but not all, against mobile are a variation on the familiar man-in-the-middle attack. We have man in the browser, man in the operating system, and man in the network. Here's our mobile attack surface, device attack surface. What behaviors can present issues? Well, in the browser, we can get phishing, farming, clickjacking, man-in-the-middle, buffer overflow, data caching. SMS, we can get baseband attacks and smishing, which is SMS phishing. In the apps, we have a whole slew of very similar to what we see in the application attacks in the traditional IT market. Sensitive data storage, no encryption, encryption improperly used, improper SSL validation, configuration manipulation, dynamic runtime injection, unintended permissions, escalated privileges, and I should add SQL injections, where here I don't think it's in any of this diagram here. Okay, you know, many of the applications store their data in a SQLite database. All right, you've probably seen SQLite. It's a very lightweight database. It's a relational database. It operates very similar to, say, a SQL Server or a MySQL or Oracle, except it's much smaller and more lightweight, which means that it's just as vulnerable to SQL injection as those other systems are. As far as the system goes, we have things like no passcode or weak passcode, iOS jailbreaking, Android rooting, OS data caching, passwords and data accessible, carrier loaded software. So each one of the carriers is going to load their own software. So you have both the manufacturers and the carriers. So for instance, in Android, you might have software that's loaded just by Samsung. Or if you're on Verizon, you might have software that's loaded just by Verizon. So this creates a lot of fragmentation within the market, which means more opportunity for the attackers. No encryption or weak encryption, and some user-initiated code as well. Ibrahim's here from, Ibrahim, are you from SA? You're from Saudi Arabia, I believe. Is that correct? So it's kind of late for you. Yes, late in the day for you. Are you done with your workday, or are you hanging around for class? Yes, okay. Great, glad you're here. So, mobile risk model, continuing on. The client side is much more aggressive, right? So promiscuous exposure to communication, there's a physical attack, physical access. You know, I always say that if you give me physical access to your device, game over, right? It's too easy if there's physical access. There's software attacks, exfiltration vectors, compromise can be, if there is a compromise, unlike on a PC, okay, if there's a compromise, the compromise becomes much more personal, right? So, for instance, and we've all seen these in the attacks, right? So the phone has very, very precise location data. So if somebody can attack the phone and compromise it, basically they can track every step, okay? Even if the location is turned off, it's still possible to track your location very, very closely, as long as if you're in an urban area. Okay, if you're in an urban area, you know, there's this constant triangulation that goes on between the cell towers, and you can get very precise location. If you're in rural areas, then it gets, yeah, it gets a little less precise, talking like a half a mile or so. Okay, so about a kilometer thereabouts. That's still pretty precise. If you're in an urban location, you're down to about 500 feet. Okay. There's also going to be photos. There's going to be a camera that can be activated, and of course, there's all the SMS messages that are on there, as well as, you know, email messages, browsing history, what have you. But the point here being that unlike traditional IT, where if that gets compromised, there is some personal information there, but far more on the phone, far more on the phone. People don't take naked pictures of themselves with their PCs. They do with their phones. To put a fine point on it, or less than a fine point. That's kind of interesting. I remember when the cell phones first came out, and I went and they started coming out with phones with the cameras on them. I go, all right, why would you want a camera on your phone? Well, that's kind of a dumb question in 2019, but in 1999, I didn't see any purpose for, it's like, I got a camera, I got a phone, why do I need a camera on my phone? Okay? That seems like a really dumb question in 2019. Now they have three, Vadim says. Yes. And I guess I really haven't fully comprehended why they have three, except to give maybe some depth. Is that give it kind of a three-dimensional image? Is that what why the new Apple phone wide angle? Okay, wide angle. You could do wide angle without three. That's a lens issue. Okay, but I can if you get three cameras, you can create some depth to your photo. It says need no camera phones. Right? Says, I know we're spoiled. There's more vectors to hack. It is more vectors to hack, but that the cell phone, smartphone has become the communication device, right? If you go into any restaurant or you go in any public place, go to a coffee shop, and just look at people's heads. Every one of them, their heads are buried in their phone. And they'll look up every once in a while, but most of the time, they're looking at the phone. So maybe this will change with time. Maybe it will, okay? Especially if we get things like, smart glasses like the Google Glass and others where we don't have to look at it. But it's just kind of every time I go out into public places and I look around, I'm always like, look at everybody's face in their phone. They're not looking at each other. They're all looking at their phone and texting and surfing, what have you. So it's become really an intimate part of our communication and our social life. It is changing our social life. Okay, we go into somebody's home for a social occasion and look around and see how many people are looking at their phone, okay, within that social environment. So rather than talking to each other or socializing, they're often on their phone. Now, I'm not saying that's good or bad. Okay, I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just saying this is really a significant change in social behavior in the last 20 years, or actually less than that, 10 years, right? And I don't know what the repercussions are going to be. I mean, there are some people who have all these dire forecasts of what this means to the future of people socializing, and they're almost always negative, right? And I'm not so sure that it's all negative, because this is something that has happened throughout history when we have new technologies like television. Okay, television was condemned, maybe for good reason. Television was condemned as something that was going to make us less social, right? And maybe it did, right? But at the same time, it may have opened new worlds for the individual. Okay, I can make a case that the cell phone is opening the world more to more individuals. We can communicate to people any place on the planet, okay, and get a better idea of what their concerns are, what their thoughts are, what have you, which is a good thing. Andrew says, writing was condemned as ruining our memories. That's not what I know about, Andrew, but it's probably true. Okay, so whenever anything changes, people are quick to condemn. And it's usually old people. Almost always, it's the old people who condemn because it's not the way that they grew up, or that it was not there when they were growing. It's like, when we were growing up, we didn't do it this way, so this must be bad, right? It must be bad because it's not the way we did it. And look at us, we're perfect, right? So whenever I hear one of my friends start making those kinds of comments, I always kind of like, that's what old people have said throughout history. Old people have always condemned whatever the change is. Whatever the change happens to be, old people always. And I'm not condemning old people here. I'm just saying it's because they didn't grow up with this technology that they automatically will think of it as being negative. All right, is that because I didn't grow up with it, therefore it's not good. So, in any case, Some of the physical risk. We talked about physical risk. Physical access to device is impossible to defend against for long, okay? And it's probably a bigger risk in the mobile device market than it is in the PC market, right? Because we got this little device that's in our pocket all the time. And we set it down, okay, on a table when we're eating, when we go out someplace, sometimes we'll put it down. How many of us have forgotten our phone someplace, right? And more, these devices have our entire lives on them, right? So that if somebody gets a hold of it, then it's not very hard to be able to exploit a device once you have physical access to it. And this would include rooting and jailbreaking. Any app can be defeated with physical access. And basically, as I always say, physical access equals game over, right? Physical access, okay, close proximity is basically the same as physical access. We have a lot of services on our phone that are accessible only at close proximity. So, for instance, we have Wi-Fi, but that's well known. But on the mobile device, we have NFC, near field communication, right? We also have Bluetooth, okay? Bluetooth is referred to as a piconet, and we'll talk about Bluetooth in this class. It's a piconet, it's supposed to be at least, 10 meters, right? But many Bluetooth devices can extend up to 100 meters. 100 meters is still pretty close proximity. It's not gonna give you access from around the world, but in densely populated areas within 100 meters, there's a lot of devices, right? So close proximity oftentimes can mean the equivalent of physical access, right? So for instance, if attacker's close enough, they can get your phone to connect to a rogue base station. And we'll talk a little bit about that, right? So there always is the possibility of a rogue base station. These rogue base stations can range anywhere from, say, a femtocell, which has a range about the same as a Wi-Fi connection, so that if I can put a femtocell near your home, on the outside wall, what have you, I can pick up all of your communication and I can intercept it. Basically, man in the middle attack, right? So we're talking about it's a man in the middle attack. A femtocell costs, I just priced one the other day. It's like I can get one for $150. Usually they're in the area of $100 to $300. That's pretty cheap, right? So if I want to attack you, all I got to do is get this femtocell near you. I could put it in a coffee shop, right, or other public place, where people hang out. Put it out in the outs. Put it in your garbage can. Storm says, "How do you spell femtocell?" We're going to talk about femtocells, but I will. Femtocell. You all know that. I'm a fan of Mr. Robot, right? And so one of the scenes in Mr. Robot, they use a femtocell when they were trying to hack the FBI. Okay, so they got a femtocell. Yeah, I agree. It's a fantastic show. It's a fantastic show for a lot of reasons. But as somebody who's involved in information security and hacking, it's probably the only show that's ever been made, television show or TV show, that actually is realistic, right? It's realistic. The things that he does are things that can really be done, right? Now, sometimes they make it look easier than it is, right? But it's still stuff that can really be done. I mean, you watch a lot of hacker movies, what have you, and it's not realistic at all. I mean, first of all, they're not using real tools, and they're doing things that aren't really, they can't normally be done, and there's lots of spinning geometric shapes and animations and what have you. Yeah, and so, like, for instance, on Mr. Robot, he hacks everybody's password, right? And that's a little more difficult than it shows it on the show. He usually, he accomplishes that in a few seconds, where you might be at it more like a few hours, right? But one of the things that I put together an article on in Hackers Arise and have a chapter in my new book is that, with a little bit of open source intelligence, okay, you can create very specific password lists, okay, in which case, you have a shot at being able to crack somebody's password in a matter of minutes. Right? If you're using a multi-million word password list, you're going to be there for days and maybe for weeks, okay, and maybe for years, and probably still not get any results. But if you know a little bit about the person, and he shows in Mr. Robot, he does that, right? He goes to people's Facebook pages and their LinkedIn profiles and what have you, and gathers information about them. You can put that information into tools to generate specific passwords linked to that person, right? And if you can put together 10,000 passwords that are specific to that person, you can run through those in a few minutes and try to break it. And that's what he does on the show. And that's realistic. Trying to crack brute force passwords without knowing anything about the individual is a fool's errand, unless you have a lot of resources. And he does it on the show. He doesn't have a lot of resources. But if you have the resources of NSA or the GRU, or you got a multi-million machine botnet, what have you, then you can just brute force anything, right? You can go ahead and brute force anything if you have those kinds of resources. Without those resources, you're probably foolish to try to brute force. You need to be very specific. And the truth of the matter is that people don't get very sophisticated with their passwords, right? Most people are still using very simple passwords, even though they've been told over and over again that they should. What they'll do is they'll take a password and add a couple numbers onto it, and maybe an exclamation point or a question mark or an @ or $, what have you. And that's real easy still to crack, right? So there's tools that will allow you to go ahead and what's called munge the password, okay, by adding those in there. And you can get most people's passwords that way. So enough about password cracking. But what I wanted to talk about is that Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, GPS, and near-field communication are all very close, okay? And if I can get close proximity, and close proximity meaning, near-field communication is very limited, okay? Near-field communication, as you know, is about 1.5 inches, right? But it's possible in near-field communication to be able to put in a relay near, say, a checkout counter and send that and amplify it and send it out to somebody on the outside. We'll talk about that probably tomorrow, all right? So Wi-Fi, we know it has all the same vulnerabilities as Wi-Fi on our PC. Bluetooth, there's a number of vulnerabilities of Bluetooth, but you have to be within 100 meters. But 100 meters is that's pretty good. That's pretty good size. Okay, it's a pretty good range, a radius. And if you're in some place that is highly populated, okay, and 100 meters, you can see a lot of people. I think I've told this story before in class. Maybe none of you were in that class, but this is, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago. I had a company come to me and they said, what we want to do is that we want to send advertisements, okay, to everybody's Bluetooth device who passes the corners in Las Vegas, right? Right. So if you've ever been to Las Vegas, each intersection is just clustered with 100 people on each corner, right? sometimes more than that, right? Especially at night and during big busy times. And so all day long, there are thousands and thousands of people passing every intersection in the Vegas Strip. So the idea here, and if you've also been to Vegas, you know that as you pass each corner, there are people handing out cards advertising whatever the services that they're selling. Okay. Oftentimes, the services in Vegas are women, right? And that's what Vegas is like if you haven't been there. So they came to me and said, well, what we want you to do, we want you to put together a system that's going to basically send a message to every Bluetooth device that passes. And those people are, there's thousands and thousands of people passing each one of these corners in Vegas that will send, you could send them an advertisement, okay, to their phone. And I said, no, not, that's not something I'm really interested in doing, but it's easy enough to do. I could do it, but I'm not interested. And they never told me what the product was. My guess is it was probably prostitutes, okay? And that's Vegas. Escorts or prostitutes. In Vegas, I always refer to them as escorts, not as prostitutes, because prostitution is actually illegal in Vegas. It's legal in the rest of Nevada, but not within Clark County where Vegas is at. So it's always escorts. Okay, some of the service risks. Most bugs are on the server side. Most code and logic is on the server side. Valuable data resides on the server side, so that's the focus of the attackers. Also, customer support is on the server side, such as a password reset. Right? So that's why a lot of the attention is focused on the server side. App risks, early attacks focused on the network layer. Then they moved to the operating system, then to the applications, and now many of them are focused on social engineering. I'm going to be offering a class in the Subscriber Pro on social engineering. There's also going to be the final chapter of my new book will be on social engineering. And I think most people in our industry, especially the technical side, don't want to think about social engineering, right? They want to focus on the technical side of things. With social engineering, if you're not focusing on social engineering, you're missing a lot, right? You're missing a lot because that is oftentimes the most important vector into your network. Okay, and if you're a pen tester hacker, and you're not doing some kind of social engineering, then you're missing a major segment of the possible ways of getting into the system. If you've ever read Kevin Mitnick's books, Mitnick basically is a social engineer, right? This is in the 80s and the 90s, and his primary way of getting into systems was through social engineering. He was a master of social engineering, right? Most pen test firms, the Big 10 pen test firms, do social engineering as well. So not only are they testing all of the known vulnerabilities, but they're also testing your people, right, to see whether or not they are vulnerable to social engineering. And good social engineering can be very effective, right? I mean, you probably, every day I get social engineering attempts, okay, sent to me via email or text message. I mean, that's kind of where things are going now, is text message social engineering, okay? SMS phishing, okay? And I get some that, I'm like, wow, that's pretty darn good. And occasionally I'll get a social engineering attack. I'm like, and I don't recognize it as a social engineering attack. And the one I always mention that almost had me was when my cell phone bill came. And I get it, you probably do too. My cell phone bill came via email, right? And this cell phone bill that month came via email, and it looked just like my cell phone bill, and it said, basically it was like triple my normal amount, right? I'm like, oh my God, what happened? How could it be that high? And like, I don't know where I was at. I think I was in DC at the time, right? I'm not at home, and I see this, and I'm distracted. I'm like, and I'm working, and I'm distracted by this email, and going, what the heck happened? And I'm just about to click on it to see what happened, and then I went, oh, I get my bill on the 4th of the month, and this is like the 15th of the month, and that's the only thing that kept me from clicking on it. It was perfect outside of that. Right? If they had sent it on the right day, they would have had me. Right? So social engineering is a real important part of mobile risk as well as the entire hacking security environment. Okay, always on connectivity presents unique issues. Our systems are on all the time. Our PCs probably are not. Mine are, but yours probably aren't. And the rest of the world, probably most of the rest of the world shuts down their machines when they're not working. Because I work all kinds of weird hours, and maybe you do too. My PCs are on all the time, but my phone is definitely on all the time. All right. There's also a close intimacy between the user and the mobile device. Right? So oftentimes, I mean, they always have that device with them, and they will take it every place that they go. Right? So if the attacker can turn on the camera, the mic, what have you, there's the potential for invasion of privacy. Okay, in a way that doesn't happen in a PC environment, right? Everyone is connected to your phone, right? Everyone is connected to your phone. Your apps are always connected to your phone, and everyone may include the attacker. The other big issue that we don't have necessarily in the traditional IT market is fragmentation, right? Like in desktop security, quick patching helps tremendously. Yes, that's true. This is challenging though because of fragmentation, right? Android has numerous variations for each device manufacturer, right? So each manufacturer has a slightly different version of Android, as I was pointing out. Now, Android is, I heard somebody say recently, they were talking about, the mobile device market, and they said, well, half of them are Apple and half of them are Android. And I'm like, no, okay. Android is almost 80% of the world, right? So iOS is a relatively, it's about 19% of the global market, right? Android is the dominant player, right? It's similar, not quite the same as say Microsoft Windows, but it is the dominant player, right? So in the US, it might be close to 50-50, but in the world, the dominant player is Android. And each one of the manufacturers and developers has different versions of Android. This creates issues, okay, with patching. And it also creates issues of each one of these systems is slightly different. So how do you create a universal patch when each one of these operating systems is slightly different? It might be up to the developer to patch it. Implementing security patches and ASLR. ASLR is what's it stand for? Basically, it's a randomization, address space layout randomization. Right, that's what ASLR. And you'll hear that term more and more throughout this class, and you'll probably hear it more and more through my classes. ASLR is a measure that operating system developers have implemented to try to minimize the possibility of buffer overflow. Okay, doesn't mean that they just have made it more difficult. It's address space layout randomization. This means that if you're trying to do a buffer overflow, you may not know where your code is going. Okay. Normally, if a particular heap or stack is always in the same location in memory, that makes your job easier, right? But now you don't necessarily know where it is. Makes buffer overflows more difficult. I think I mentioned in the last class I taught that one of my students came to me and said, my professor said that buffer overflows are not a problem anymore. That's the old days. It's like, no, that's wrong. ASLR makes it more difficult, but it's certainly, we still have lots of buffer overflows, okay? Lots of, if you look at the attacks that are going on iOS, on Windows, on Linux, a good majority of them that are remote code execution are buffer overflows. ASLR makes it more difficult, okay, but doesn't make it impossible. So implementing security patches in ASLR more challenging in a fragmented Android market, right? Android has the overwhelming numbers. Despite this, 82% of the global market. I actually just looked at, I think it's down to about 79.5% or something like that. All right. So it's still right around 80%. All right. I think when I pulled this off some older data and then looked it up afterwards, like 79 and a half. And it also depends on whose data you're looking at, but it's somewhere around 80% of the globe. Because Android is the 800-pound gorilla. Patching, having a security patch doesn't ensure that they are applied, right? Have any of you postponed your security patches when your phone says, hey, we got a security patch for you? Have you ever postponed it? Anybody done that? You don't want to admit it? I might miss a few comments here. Vadim says, very minority report, like, lost audio. That just me? I think it is. Let's see. Andrew says, infamous last words. My professor said, yeah, Vadim says, don't lie, we all have. Well, I have. I will admit that. Because I don't, part of the reason, I think, for me at least, is that almost when you get these security patches, oftentimes the phone changes as well as on your PC, right? Sometimes apps don't work, right, on both your PC and on your phone. And I've had, we've all probably had the circumstances where we've updated a security patch, and all of a sudden, in my phone at least, things have all changed. The location of things has changed. Certain apps don't work anymore, and so I've postponed them, and I've postponed them, and I've postponed them, and I've postponed them. So just because there is a security patch doesn't mean that phones are patched, right? And because of the fragmentation of the market, Storm admits it, okay? Vadim admits it too. All right, so probably everybody has, maybe not. I mean, some people are real good about putting their security patches in. I admit that I am not, because you're a freak about it, Andrew says. Okay, so that when that patch comes through, you go ahead and update it immediately. Good for you. Yeah, Andrew says, yeah, I see it and I immediately do it. Well, kudos to you. Vadim says, my exes, maybe that's why she got rid of me. Andrew says, I'm mildly OCD. So, it's maybe, Andrew, have you ever put a patch in and had your phone not work properly afterwards? Yes, okay. That's kind of my concern. The other thing is that, I don't know, I guess I feel like if my phone gets attacked, that I will notice it and be able to clean it out. All right. Now there's always the issue of the NSA and other such state organizations, but those patches aren't going to patch against those NSA attacks, right? So if you're worried about NSA attacks to your phone or mobile device, the patching is not going to do anything about it, okay? Because the NSA doesn't release, the developers don't know what the NSA is doing, right? Sometimes they do eventually, but usually they'll go years without the state-run organizations or anybody knowing what they're doing and being able to patch against. So for instance, in the case of Eternal Blue, we don't know how long it had been out there and being used for spying purposes. And the only reason we know about it is because it got stolen from one of the contractors. If it hadn't been stolen, and it was probably stolen by the GRU, the Russians. Okay, so if it hadn't been stolen by them, it's probably still being used today. And so that's the only way we find out about it. This SimJacker, one of the security firms noticed it, right? And these do happen. The security firms do notice it, and they'll see something out there that looks strange, but Eternal Blue does not fit into that category. Okay, Eternal Blue was out there for a while. We don't know how long, and nobody saw it. Nobody knew about it. Right? It was being used. SimJacker, some firm, I don't remember who it was. We'll find out when I do the presentation on it. Noticed it and presented it last week, and they're supposed to come out with a proof of concept here in the next, I think it's in early October is what they were saying, and we'll be able to see how well it works. So having a security patch doesn't ensure that they're applied. People don't apply them. Sometimes the firms don't push them out. Developers need discipline and obtain info on the latest vulnerabilities, right? Still, users install apps via side channels such as a browser. So that happens. People do install apps via side channels, especially within the Android market. In the iOS market, they do as well, right? But it's probably less common there. Fragmentation means unique vulnerabilities to each different device manufacturer. This is a big issue. Fragmentation means unique vulnerabilities to each different device manufacturer, as well as, of course, there are the vulnerabilities that come with different apps on the phone, okay? Also, we have to think about sensitive information leakage. One of the largest risks on mobile: authentication pins in the system logs, session identifiers in the web view, sensitive data in the SQLite database, and sensitive credentials are logged in keyboard cache. Also, we have the transitive nature of app sandboxing. This is part of the sensitive information leakage. Application with permission performs a privileged task for an app without permissions. And we'll talk a little bit later, probably today, about permissions within the apps on the operating system. An application with permissions performs a privileged task for an app without permissions, okay? So if you're familiar with Linux, and basically both of these operating systems, both iOS and Android, are a form of Linux Unix, right? So the iOS is a form of Unix, and Android is a form of Linux. Right? They are just variations on it. Both of them are using those kernels. And we know that Linux and Unix share a lot. They're not identical, but they share a lot. And one of the things that they share is how they deal with permissions. So if you understand how permissions are used in Linux Unix, you'll get a good idea of how they're used in these mobile devices. So you probably know a little bit about the sticky bit or the special bits in Linux, where one app can operate under another application's permissions. That happens within these mobile devices as well. A bad app may ask another app to call the log API on its behalf, for instance. Right? And then we have application input validation. If an app does not handle input carefully, it can be used, that should be used to attack other apps. Another fat finger right there, attack other apps. And secure on-device storage, we have both we have internal, external storage on these devices. They have secrets are stored in mobile software is a flawed strategy. Okay, physical access, game over. So if secrets are stored in the mobile software, that's not a good strategy at all. Once again, if we got physical access, we can go ahead and get that. And also, we have to think about things like encryption, what have you, and digital certificates, right? And then weak authentication. It's similar to a classic problem in desktop environments where people use very weak pins, passwords, what have you, and all of that can lead to uh, the exploitation of that device. Okay, that's kind of the introduction. That's what we're going to be thinking about and working with for the next couple days. Let's go ahead and it's a good time to take our break. Let's go take a 15-minute break. I got a 14 minutes, 15 minutes after the hour. Let's come back at 30 minutes after the hour. And I want to talk to you about the SimJacker exploit. Kind of, even though we still don't know all the details, I think it's scary enough to kind of put your mind on the focus your mind on how vulnerable these systems can be. We'll see you in about 15 minutes. Okay, let's get going with class again. Javier has joined us. Apparently, Javier had sent me an email and said you didn't get the meeting ID. Good morning, Javier. Did you check your spam folder to see if it's in there? It was in spam? Okay. Just kind of a heads up, everybody, is that sometimes, my emails end up in your spam. So if you're expecting one, check in your spam folder. I send out a lot of emails, and so unfortunately, a lot of systems put it in spam. So you didn't miss much, Javier. We started a little late. We went through kind of an introduction, and that's what we just finished up before our break. We're just coming back from our morning break, and what we're going to do next is we're going to talk about a brand new attack vector that just came out in the last week or so. It's called SimJacker. So let me get this up on the screen. The latest mobile threat, SimJacker. So this is a threat that most of us didn't really know existed, right? And this is what it is that it's an attack, once again, probably developed by a nation state, right? That is able to send SMS messages that you don't see, okay? That go directly to the SIM card, okay? That developers and manufacturers of devices can use to manage and control your device. So if they want to send additional software or updates, they can send it directly. They can send it directly to the SIM cards. Let's talk about that, right? Once again, this just came out in the last week or so, probably middle of last week, if I remember correctly. If you follow my Twitter feed, I put it out there in Twitter feed. Okay. So SimJacker, this is a unique and novel mobile core network vulnerability that's currently being exploited by a sophisticated attacker in multiple countries for surveillance reasons. Once again, that's probably, being used by a nation state, all right, or somebody who's working for a nation state. Like I said, the nation states contract to an awful lot of companies to do their dirty work for them. So this is a way that a nation state can spy on somebody's text messages, listen in their phone calls, read their emails, what have you. This exploit represents arguably one of the most complex and sophisticated attacks ever seen over mobile core networks. Okay, that's why I'm putting it up here right now. Right, is because it's one, it's not patched. Okay, Andrew's coming and going. It's not patched, so we are all vulnerable to it. All right. And until it gets patched, the nation state is able to surveil our phones. SimJacker, the observed attack involves the remote retrieval of specific information such as location without the awareness or interaction of the mobile phone user. So the mobile phone user has no idea this is taking place. The vulnerability can also be used to perform additional types of attacks such as a DOS attack, fraud, and other forms of information harvesting. It's dubbed SimJacker. The vulnerability resides in a particular piece of software called the SAT or SAT browser. It's a dynamic SIM toolkit embedded on most SIM cards, is widely used by mobile operators in at least 30 countries and can be exploited regardless of which handset the victims are using. Right? A specific private company that works with governments is actively exploiting the SimJacker vulnerability for at least the last 2 years to conduct targeted surveillance of mobile phone users across several countries. The SAT browser, short for the Sim Alliance Toolbox browser, okay, is an application that comes installed on a variety of SIM cards. So I guess you could protect yourself by simply taking out your SIM card, including eSIM as part of the SIM toolkit, and has been designed to let mobile carriers provide some basic services, subscriptions, and value-added services over the air to customers. So this is a way that the mobile carriers can provide some basic services, subscriptions, and value-added services. And somebody who knows the mobile devices well has figured out how to use that to be able to send an SMS message that will enable a remote code execution on the device so they can be surveilled. Since, I'm not sure how this is, I'll call it SAT. Since the SAT browser contains a series of STK instructions, such as send short message, set up call, launch browser, provide local data, run at command, and send data, that can be triggered by just sending an SMS message to the device. The software offers an execution environment to run the malicious commands on the mobile phones as well. So this means that there can be phone calls initiated, browsers being opened, SMS messages sent at behest of the user. Not only can they be surveilled, but their phone can be used to send specific messages and make certain actions without their ever knowing they're taking place. This may be, this is kind of like the Stuxnet of mobile hacking. It's once again like Stuxnet. It was a nation state, okay, that implemented it, and it takes, would this be like Eternal Blue as well? Andrew asks. Yeah, in some cases, Eternal Blue basically was actually much simpler than one. Eternal Blue was an attack developed by a nation state, the U.S. in this case, NSA, that was used to surveil people. So in that case, it is like Eternal Blue, but unlike Eternal Blue, this is much more sophisticated. Okay, Eternal Blue was in many cases a simpler piece of malware than this is. Stuxnet is very sophisticated, right? Stuxnet is very, and probably no cyber crime, what have you, would be able to develop it. It took a bunch of very dedicated, high-level attackers to be able to develop. I hate to say this, but, and I probably am being immodest, but I think that I could have developed Eternal Blue if all I did was focus like a year of my time. That I could have developed Eternal Blue, all right? But at the same time, I don't think I could have given a year of my time. I don't think I could have developed Stuxnet, right? So for whatever that's worth, I think I am awed by the sophistication of Stuxnet. Like, what Eternal Blue did is it took one service and just went through that service, okay, SMB, looking for a buffer overflow. All right, that's all. That's all it did. Look for a buffer overflow where it could install, remote code. Stuxnet is a lot more sophisticated than that, right? So that's why Stuxnet, it took a lot of people, a lot of time, supposedly, and I think there's some credibility to this, is that it was a joint effort by the NSA and some Israeli hackers. I don't know if you, once again, if you do follow my Twitter feed, just a couple days ago, we found out that for years I think some of you have taken my SCADA classes. You know what Stuxnet is, and since you're in information security, you probably know what Stuxnet is. And very, very sophisticated piece of software that attacked the centrifuges in Iran. in 2010. So it's a little long in the tooth now, but still, it still awes me. Yes, good choice. Mark Borg says Kim Zetter's book is excellent. What's the name of that book? Kim Zetter wrote a book on Stuxnet, and I can't remember the name of it. Zero Day or something like that. Countdown to Zero Day. There you go. Countdown to Zero Day. So Kim Zetter wrote a book on Stuxnet that if you're in the industry, you want to know more about what's going on. That's one that is worth reading. I also point out that there's a new book coming out called Sandworm that let me see if it's out yet. It's a book coming out that I'm anxious to read. I think I'm on the it's in November, Mark says. That is written about Sandworm is a group of hackers, Russian hackers, and they are responsible for. Once again, it might be private. Okay, it may not be part of the government. The Russians do the same as the U.S. does, is they use contractors. And Sandworm is a team that's done some pretty sophisticated hacks, probably most noticeably the Ukrainian electrical grid was hacked by Sandworm, among other things. But give me a sec here, I'll tell you when it's coming out. It's one that I'm on the waiting list for. November 5th, so you're right. Okay, there you go. Mark's got it, Andrew's got it out there. Yeah, that's coming out, another 5 weeks or so. And so the subtitle of it is A New Era of Cyber War and the Hunt for the Kremlin's Most Dangerous Hackers by Andy Greenberg, who writes for Wired Magazine. He's a excellent writer who specializes in information security issues, and particularly he's been focusing on Sandworm for a number of years here now. And so he's finally getting a book out there that will be out there. And it's probably worth, I don't know. I've read some of his stuff. I think he's a good writer. He seems to be knowledgeable. We'll see if it's a book, but it's one that I have on my list that I want to read soon when it comes out. So, but Kim Zetter probably has the best book on Stuxnet. I think I have, let me check. I think I have a breakdown on Stuxnet in the SCADA section. Yeah, I do, of Hackers Arise. So I kind of lay out what happened there, but very, very sophisticated attack. So I kind of put this one on as the Stuxnet of the mobile device market. All right. So we talked about it sends out short message, setup call, launch browser, what have you. So in many ways, it was simply some sophisticated group who knew that this toolkit exists and then how to access it, right? And if this is your focus and you got a team of attackers, it's not inconceivable that you could come up with something like SimJacker. This vulnerability can be exploited using a $10 GSM modem to perform several tasks on a targeted device just by sending an SMS containing a specific type of spyware-like code, retrieving targeted device location and IMEI information, spreading misinformation by sending fake messages on behalf of the victims. Okay, these are all possible with SimJacker. Also, you can perform premium rate scams by dialing premium rate numbers. So once again, if you got control of the device, right? Lots of things you can do. You can send out, make phone calls, send out text messages, send out emails. You can spy on the victim's surroundings by instructing the device to call the attacker's phone number. Spreading malware by forcing the victim's phone browser. So, if there's additional capability that you want, you can go ahead and open up a browser and send it to a malicious site where you can go ahead and install the malware from there. Perform a DOS attack by disabling the SIM card. Now, that might seem like it's not that important. But imagine or think about circumstances here. I mean, oh, let's think about, say, the Hong Kong. Okay, you probably know what's going on in Hong Kong. In Hong Kong, there's this battle going on between the people of Hong Kong and the Chinese government, right? And the Hong Kong folks don't like the heavy-handedness of the Chinese government. Hong Kong is, to give you some background on it, it had the British, it was a British colony, right? And the British negotiated 100-year lease, okay, to Hong Kong in 1897. That 100-year lease expired in 1997. Therefore, Hong Kong became part of mainland China in 1997. At that time, China said, well, okay, you're not going to be entirely part of China. You'll have some independence and be able to rule and govern yourself until this year. Okay. And then this year, the Chinese government has basically said, you're going to abide by our law. So that's what's going on in China right now, right? So you've got millions of people in the street, okay, protesting what's going on there. If I were Red China, I might want to DOS your phone. Therefore, you guys can't organize, right? You're not able to communicate with each other. Or I could just listen in on your conversations, and I wouldn't be surprised that we find out that this is a Chinese piece of malware, right? But this would allow them to listen in on the phone, and if organizers need to communicate with each other by performing a DOS attack on them, then they can't talk to each other, or at critical times, I can shut off their communication, right? We've seen governments do this in the past. During the Arab Spring, right? We had governments who would shut off the internet, okay, so that the revolutionaries, okay, the rebels, couldn't communicate with each other, right? So this is probably, my guess is that this is being used by a government for this purpose. Now, there's also there's some turmoil going on in Russia as well, internally. So this might also be from there, but it'll be interesting. We'll find out probably in the next week or two. You could also retrieve other information like language, radio type, battery level, etc. During the attack, the user is completely unaware that they received the attack, that information was retrieved, and that it was successfully exfiltrated. Initially, people thought, well, okay, if the attacker sends me a text message, I'll see it, right? No, okay? It's not going to appear in your text message. It's a specially crafted text message to the SIM card, okay? It's basically built for the developer, the handset developer, to be able to communicate to your phone. So we talked about earlier in the section of this class that everybody's connected to your phone all the time. One of the people who's connected to your phone all the time is your handset developer, right? They've given themselves a back door to your system, right? This is not unlike in the early days of, actually, probably about 5 to 10 years ago, right? That oftentimes software developers would give themselves a back door to their software. So when you called in for tech support, they could take over your system. I outlined in Linux Basics for Hackers a backdoor that was put into software that was used in small restaurants called the Aloha point of sale system, right? And there's a famous hacker by the name of, what's his name? Escaping me a minute, Max Vision. Max Butler was his real name. He went by Max Vision. And he was a white hat during the day and a black hat at night, right? And he figured out there was a back door in this software. This is like 2007, 2008, 2009. And the folks who developed that software just put a back door in so that, hey, you call up and say, hey, I don't know how to get this system to do this. They say, oh, okay, well, we'll help you. And they will then use that back door to log into your system to help you out, right? He figured out this was there on port 5505, and he then was able to use that to extract credit card numbers and PII of all those restaurants. At one time, he had so many credit card numbers he couldn't sell them fast enough, right? So this is not unusual. Sony has done this on their systems. Another example within our mobile market is that there's actually a back door that's built into Android called the ADB. Okay, the Android developers, I think it's B, backdoor. I'm not sure if it's B stands for backdoor. It's called the ADB. And it's for the developers. And in some cases, it has been left in on devices that have been actually sold. Okay, and I think I have one here. And if I can, it's an old, and it's been sort of 5 years old or so, and I've got a whole ton of Android devices in here. And I think I have one that has that back door built into it. And if I do, I'll show you how we can access it. But those devices, and they were primarily developed and sold in China. But this particular, it's a tablet that I have that I bought out of China. And you know, they're sold in the United States too, but mostly in China, have this backdoor still built in. So anybody can access this device online because it has a developer backdoor into it. This is similar to that. It's a backdoor that has been there and nobody really knew about it until right now. Okay. The location information of thousands of devices was obtained over time without the knowledge or consent of the targeted mobile phone users. The SIMJacker attack can and has been extended further to perform additional types of attacks. The attack is also unique in that the SIMJacker attack message could logically be classified as carrying a complete malware payload, specifically spyware. This is because it contains a list of instructions that the SIM card is able to execute. Real attacks have been observed against users with devices from nearly every manufacturer, okay, including Apple, which, you know, everybody believes that their Apple phone is impervious, okay, but not to this attack, okay. And there's some truth that the iOS is more secure than, say, Android, but this attack has nothing to do with the operating system, right? So including Apple, ZTE, Motorola, Samsung, Google, Huawei, and even IoT devices with SIM cards in. All manufacturers and mobile phone models are vulnerable to SIMJacker attack as the vulnerability exploits a legacy technology embedded on the SIM cards, whose specification has not been updated since 2009, potentially putting over 1 billion people at risk. Now this vulnerability has publicly been revealed, expect the hackers and other malicious actors will try to evolve these attacks in other areas. So now, if I am a cybercrime organization, right, and I know that this is there, I may not have known that before, well, heck, let's work on this. Let's develop a way to exploit it, right? Once we know that this attack is possible, let's go ahead and work on it and figure out a way to do it. Very similar to, say, Eternal Blue, right? That even though when Eternal Blue came out in April of 2017, right, it was patched immediately, but it was still used for months afterwards for Petya and WannaCry ransomware. So that's probably what we're going to be seeing here for quite some while. My guess is that it's going to take a while because it's not it's not that easy, okay, to be able to remove and update this SIM toolkit. Okay, there's nothing a mobile device user can do if they're using a SIM card with the SAT browser technology deployed on, except requesting for a replacement, okay, of their SIM that has proprietary security mechanisms in place, okay, and we don't even have those yet. So that's the only thing we can do, or you can simply take your SIM card out, right? And that may not be a viable solution for some people. All right. So that's something to think about, and that kind of gives you an idea of the sophistication of attacks that we're looking at right now in this area. That may be among the most sophisticated that we're going to see, at least this year. Let's before we progress to hacking, let's take some time to kind of lay out the groundwork of some of the technologies involved here. And let's start with the cellular network first, all right? Let's talk about the cellular network. So, there's multiple ways of attacking mobile devices, right? And I think that a lot of books and a lot of online tutorials focus on the apps, right? But there's a lot more ways of attacking these devices than simply attacking the apps. Like I was mentioning earlier, is that you can use a femtocell, right? So if I simply wanted to attack you and intercept your phone conversations, your text messages, I could put a femtocell in the proximity of you and then intercept all of them, all right? And a femtocell is really a relatively simple device. Basically, all a femtocell does is that, and they're legal, right? This is something that's legal, unlike things like a Stingray, and we'll talk about Stingray later. A Stingray is a fake cellular tower, right? And they're fairly pricey, and they're not legal, right? A femtocell is legal, and a femtocell is sold by your mobile phone carrier. So that if, for instance, if you're in a home where there's not good cell service, right? What I can do is to buy a femtocell, put it in my home, and my cell phone will connect to the femtocell and send my signal through the wireless and wired networks. So it'll send it right through the internet versus through the cell tower network, right? And we'll look at how that works in a little bit, right? So this is a really simple and easy to implement attack against cell service. There's a femtocell. If I can get in proximity, okay? If I am not concerned about breaking the law, okay, then there's a possibility of buying, say, a Stingray, okay? Stingrays, we'll talk about those. They are pricey and they're illegal, but basically I can intercept everybody's cell phone conversations and all their traffic within a radius of that particular device. And they are used illegally, and they're used by law enforcement and espionage agencies. They are, the list price is somewhere in the area of $100,000 to $200,000, so they're not cheap. Although I have seen them advertised on Chinese markets for as little as $25,000. Right? So once again, if you get them from a third party, and for $25,000 you can intercept all of the phone. You're putting up your own cell tower. Okay, if you have your own cell tower, then everybody has to go through you. But a much more reasonable cost is a femtocell. And then we'll talk a little bit in this class about SS7, okay, where it's possible to intercept the traffic that traverses from one carrier to another, right? And you probably are familiar with the SS7, and I will do a little bit in class on SS7, but it really requires to be able to do it. You need to set up your computer as a software-defined radio, and this is something that I'm planning on putting a tutorial up on Hackers Arise, as well as teach a specific course on software-defined radio. Software-defined radio is where your computer becomes a radio, and it can send and receive signals on radio frequencies. That's what you would need to do, and you can do it. You can do it for a couple $100. Okay, so it's not real expensive. For a couple $100, you can actually do a really cheap one for $50. All right, and you can then go ahead and be able to do an SS7 attack. We'll talk more about that, but an SS7 attack allows you to intercept, okay, particularly SMS messages, okay? And so you've probably have heard and been around the information security world that now that companies are using two-factor authentication, right? So they'll go and send a PIN code to your phone, right, by SMS, right? You all done that, Twitter does it, Google does it, your bank does it, right? At least my bank does, right? So when you want to log in, they'll send a two-factor authentication. Second factor would be SMS. Hackers are able to get that message via intercepting with SS7, and there's still no patch to SS7 attacks yet. We'll talk more about that. All right, but before we do that, let's take a look at how that cellular network works. That's why we're doing this here. Okay, the cellular network underpins all the functionality of the smartphone. Okay, here we want to attempt to elucidate on the basics of the cellular network functioning. There are two primary standards, GSM and CDMA. About 80% of the terrestrial world is accessible to the cellular network, right? That's pretty significant, 80% of the terrestrial world. Interoperability, excuse me, there's some water here. No matter what technology you're using, they can all talk to each other, right? And that's where SS7 comes in, okay, is that interoperability. Okay, and we'll talk more about that probably tomorrow. So it's SS7 is how the cell network carriers talk to each other. Okay, so if you're calling somebody from, say, Verizon, and you want to talk to somebody on Sprint, the message will traverse those two networks via SS7. Okay, if you're on a Sprint phone and you're trying to call a landline, there has to be the interoperability that SS7 provides. It's an international standard for interoperability, and this is still an unclosed vulnerability in the cellular network. Interoperability, all cell network support, voicemails, voicemail, SMS, location-based services, and IP connectivity, right? Sometimes we forget about the vulnerability of voicemails, but you may remember a few years back there was a controversy in the UK where voicemails were being intercepted, and it was a big snafu in the UK, where I believe it was the Sky Network, the Sky News Network, was going ahead and hacking people's voicemails. And voicemails, contain critical information, right, that people leave behind about their whereabouts and what they're doing. So this is something we need to also think about as a vector of attack, okay? And on most of your phones, your PIN, at least on the older phones back then, the voicemail PIN was only 4 digits. Okay, that means you only have to go through 999 possibilities, right? 10,000 possibilities essentially. That can be done in a matter of seconds, right? Now they're much longer, but they're still not that long, and they're almost all numbers. So it makes it relatively easy to crack voicemail systems. GSM, okay, it's the standard in Europe, right, and much of the world. It's solid. Yeah, our voicemail is still commonly used. That's a good point, Mark. You know, people still use them, right? I don't. I almost never will leave a voicemail. What I will do, and people will do who interact with me, is if they don't reach me, like yesterday, you know, I had somebody who was trying to reach me, and when he couldn't reach me, rather than leave a voicemail, he texts me. Right? But that's me. You know, there's still some people who still use the voicemail on their systems. I know people who still use it. Some people still use voicemail. Yeah, it says, I've not checked mine in 18 months on my phone. If important, they will find you. Yeah, that's kind of the attitude we've got. But I still get people leaving voicemails on my system. But more typically now, people will go ahead. If they can't reach you, they'll just send me a text at least. But you know, one thing we always have to do. Don't think I have voicemail at all. I'll bet you do, and you just don't know it. Well, maybe not in Rwanda and Kigali, but one thing you got to do when you're in the IT industry and information security industry is you have to get outside of yourself. Okay, just because you don't do something doesn't mean that other people don't. And maybe the people you're trying to protect or hack, would depend what side you're on, right? Don't do it, right? Like for instance, I often have people in class who will go, "Well, nobody's still using a Windows 7 system, or nobody's using XP, or nobody's ever used," yeah. And I'm like, yes, they are. Okay. And the mistake people make is like, well, I'm using Windows 10 or whatever operating system, and all my friends are using Windows 10, so nobody uses Windows 10, right? I mean, nobody uses anything but Windows 10. Everybody uses it, and everybody patches, right? Not true. And that's kind of why I did this little exercise on Shodan a few months ago, where I said, okay, let's find out, you know, not only how many people are using those old operating systems, but let's see how many people actually have those operating systems connected to the internet, which means they're probably a commercial entity, right? And they've got a web server on a XP system, okay, or a Windows 95 system, and they're out there. There's tens of thousands of them, right? Windows 7 is still the second large now is now the second largest, most widely used operating system out there, right? Just because you have moved to Windows 10 doesn't mean everybody does, right? So just because you don't use voicemail, don't assume that nobody else does, right? That's a thing that is part of human nature, and we have to fight it when we're working in our field. Is that okay? What are other people doing? Other people are not necessarily as sophisticated as you. They're not as up to date as you. They're not as technically proficient as you, right? I mean, there are people who have cell phones who've never sent a text message, right? They still use it like an old landline phone, right? So that's just a caveat about when you're working in any industry is don't assume that what you do is what everybody does. Okay, that's a really huge mistake that a lot of people make, right? GSM is solid, operates well deployed worldwide. I think it's the most widely used of the technologies. In most countries, they choose either CDMA or GSM, and most countries have chosen GSM. In the US, both technologies are available. That's unusual, okay? Mobile devices are known as MTs, mobile terminals. Here's our GSM cellular network, diagram of it. It's kind of some older looking computers and older looking phones, right? And we'll take some time here to discuss what each of these acronyms mean here. But basically what we want to see here is that we have either a computer or phone is going into these BTSs, okay? And then the BSC and the PSCU. I'll lay out all these acronyms for you. Notice here, okay, SS7 network, okay? This is the interoperability. This is a big weak point, okay, in the whole structure of all the mobile networks, okay? There is no authentication still, even despite the fact that it's been successfully attacked over the last few years. There's still no authentication SS7. And if you can get into the SS7 network, okay, then you can intercept messages, okay? We'll probably address that tomorrow. Cellular network. As the MT travels, the mobile terminal, okay, it connects to a mobile base station transceivers. All right, let's go back there. Previous mobile base station receivers. The connection between the MT and the BTS is referred to as an UM. The base stations comprise of two main components, the voice and control, the BSC, and one for forwarding IP packets. Okay, so you can see back in that diagram, we have a PCU right here. This is used for sending the IP packets. Base station subsystem, the BSS, combines all of those things, the BTS, BSC, PCU. All right, we'll back it up. Okay, base station subsystem, all these here. Voice calls, the connection between the MT and the base station use different time slots. They use what's called time division multiplexing, okay, TDM. Divides the time between many devices. Each device has time to speak. TDM allows many users to divide the radio spectrum. This is a technique that has been used for many years. Right? Even your processor on your computer that you're using right now basically splits the time, okay, that each application gets to use the CPU. Right? It's a technology that's been around since the beginning of computing. This is being used as well on the voice call network. Here's some of the control elements, right? We'll talk about each of those. Location update. Location update means the mobile device is letting the GSM network know what area it's in, right? So we were talking a little bit earlier about location of the device and using, say, for instance, turning on or off GPS, right? Even if it's turned off, your device has to let the network know where it is, right? That's part of its functioning. And it does that to communicate to the network which cell tower is closest, right? So this type of triangulation that takes place between the towers gives a pretty precise indication of where the phone is located. So even if you turn off, okay, location services, it's still pretty easy to locate you, okay? And that's all going to be part of the metadata on your phone that the phone company, the carrier, has on you. Phone must authenticate with the network. Location update informs the home location register, the HLR, of the geographic area and which mobile switching center the device is in, right? It has to know that to be able to communicate successfully. Voicemail. Many of the voicemails are simply IMAP servers that serve up IMAP mailboxes using simple phone numbers. This may cause problems in the near future as IMAP has many vulnerabilities. SMS, or short message service, is one of the most interesting features. It's piggybacked on the control channel for cell phones. It's vulnerable to SMS flooding. So you can actually create a DOS attack on SMS. But the system actually does have some good procedures for being able to handle DOS attacks of SMS. We'll talk about that. Multi-purpose mechanisms is SMS for short communication between users and network elements. The SMS messages can potentially create a lot of damage if operators aren't careful. Zero authentication, zero integrity checking, zero confidentiality. Anyone in the world is allowed to send you a text message, as we found out with the SIM jacking. Anybody anywhere can send you a text message, as long as they have your phone number. And you and I have probably already gotten a SMS phishing attacks. Have anybody here? Am I the only one who's gotten SMS phishing attacks? Anybody else? No, I guess I'm the only one. Huh? Oh, you've had them, Andrew? Good. I get like every day. Okay, I've got somebody sending me these with links in them, right? Maybe just because I'm a juicy target. So anyone in the world is allowed to send you a text message, and those text messages could have links. They could have malicious. Vadim says, I work a ton. MS wants to give me money back. Yeah, right. Exactly. That's a typical one. So moving on. Configuration messages from the phone manufacturer are possible. That's what we just got done talking about, right? Those configuration messages, right? And that's what SIM jacking is. Apps may be able to simply create SMS messages and send them to the user's inbox. Attacks and vulnerabilities. So some of them might be hacking the voicemail, spoof the caller ID, right? So it's easy. It's relatively easy to spoof caller ID. We've all gotten the telemarketers, right? The telemarketers are always spoofing their phone numbers so that you will pick up. And at least in my case, they do. I mean, they always send me They always send me phone calls that are local to me. Obviously, if they're someplace else on the planet, I'm probably not going to pick it up. And they probably are someplace else on the planet, but they spoof the phone number of a local number and then send it to me. And they're the ones who always leave me voicemails. So they can spoof the caller ID. You have rogue mobile devices can be made into RF blocking or jamming device. And here's our Fentacell. Here's a diagram of the Fentacell. So there was some questions earlier about this, and I'll do a little section on Fentacells probably tomorrow or on Friday. So here's the Fentacell right here, and all it's doing is it's taking the message from the phone to the device and then sending it through the broadband access, right? And these Fentacells, all they are is an IoT device, and it has embedded Linux on it. So it's easy enough to take one of these Fentacells, get into its operating system, and then be able to say, do a man-in-the-middle attack or eavesdropping attack or what have you, or embed malware as the text messages, for instance, go through the system, right? You can have rogue mobile devices can be made into RF blocking or jamming. So we didn't even talk about jamming, but it's easy enough. Conley says, it seems it is called Fentacell. Yeah, that's what I was just saying. I'm not sure what that comment was. It seems it's called Fentacell. Yeah. Andrew says, would all says, wouldn't all IoT be considered FemtoCell like a HomePod or Google Home? Since it can get into that, you can create your own makeshift one. Well, specifically what a FemtoCell is it takes the cell phone message, okay? So I'm not sure, does Google Home allow you to make calls through it, phone calls through it? It does. Okay, well then essentially you've put a FemtoCell in your home. Oh, well, it's called both. Okay, it's either FemtoCell with a dash or FemtoCell with as a single word. Some people put it this way, some people put a dash in. I usually put a dash in. Okay. Well, then that's the case. If you can make a phone call with a HomePod or Google Home, then essentially it's a FemtoCell. That's interesting. I have not used those, so let me see. Let's see. I'm just going to do a quick look up here. Google Home. I certainly have an Alexa, but I can't make a phone call over it. Right? Google Home, Home Assistant. Let's see. So you're telling me that you can make your phone calls? Okay, well let's make a distinction here, Andrew, between initiating a phone call. Yeah, that's different. Initiating a phone call and intercepting a phone call from your mobile device. Okay, so yes, the device can make a phone call for you, but can it intercept your phone call? So if I'm using my smartphone, can I send it through the Google Home or the Alexa? I don't think so. Okay, maybe, I don't know. I mean, HomePod does that. Okay, let me check on HomePod. If so, then that's essentially what a FemtoCell is. Okay, HomePod. I'll look it up. Just Google it and see. And looks like HomePod, yeah, they're $300. That's about the price of a FemtoCell, right? And so let's see. It looks like it's mostly a music device, right? It's